Hello once again, and welcome to our weekly Parshas Shiur with the commentary of the Alshich. As has been the case in the last few weeks, the Shiur is dedicated for the Refuah Shalema of Ori Chaim ben Chana Yehudis. That's a 6-month-old little baby boy. You will know if you've been listening the last few weeks, who's in hospital, quite seriously not well, in London. So this should be a discussed for his Refuah Shalema. As always, if you would like the Shiur to be dedicated for a refuah for somebody you know, or to commemorate the yahrzeit of somebody who was dear to you, or celebrate a simcha, then please be in touch with me at yy@rabbiyyy.com. yy@rabbiyyy.com. It's the second last parsha of the Torah. It's Parshas Haazinu. Normally, I would tell you to have the chumash ready. It's only one pasuk. We're only going to look at the first pasuk on in the Alshich, so we'll come to that quite shortly. But I thought it would be important to set the scene of what this shiur is all about. Unlike normal Alshich shiurim, I'm not going to go too much because I've got lots to share with you in this shiur. So there you are. That's where we're going to be going. Don't be put off. It'll still be worthwhile being here because there is an interesting thought that ran through my mind. Everybody knows that when you go to a Shiva house, if I've been to a Shiva house, or maybe you've actually sat Shiva for maybe for a parent even, then you will know that there's a process. There's a halachic requirement, a halachic instruction that guides you through exactly how you should behave when you come to a Shiva house. And the first thing you've got to do is to say nothing. It might be that saying anything could be to say the wrong thing. The people just maybe too raw, too sensitive, that nothing's going to help. Just being there itself is essential. And it's interesting because I've seen this many times, and of course I've sat Shiva myself, um, that when a person gets up from Shiva at the end of 7 days, then very often they're lost because you know what to do. You've got exact instructions in the halacha as to how to behave during Shiva. But as soon as you get up, that's it. And I remember when I got up from Shiva from my late wife, my brother-in-law, sadly now my late brother-in-law passed away just over a year ago, and I were in the big supermarket buying food. Obviously, I've been depleted, and we're pushing the cart, the shopping trolley, as they say in England, in a store called Tesco, and there were various frum couples shopping there as well. And when they saw us coming, they sort of like looked appalled. I'm afraid the word is appalled, and started jumping down various aisles to get away from us. And there was one young couple walking towards us who were so deep in conversation they hadn't noticed. And at the very last minute, they looked up, a bit like a deer in headlights, and looked absolutely horrified and didn't know what to do. They just stood like that. And I realized it's this process. People know what to do, and maybe almost everybody that I'm talking about in that supermarket had been in to see me during a Shiva. They knew what to say and what to do during Shiva. They didn't know what to do afterwards. And sometimes, when it's the afterwards that's really it's the litmus test of really what's going on. So the thing that came into my mind was as follows: we've all just been through Elul. We climaxed with Rosh Hashanah, then we move into the month of Tishri, and then we've got 10 days leading up to Yom Kippur. And that's whatever has been decided in Rosh Hashanah is going to be sealed and stamped for the year to come when it comes to Yom Kippur. But what happens after Yom Kippur? What happens after Yom Kippur? On the 20th of June 1969, a rocket ship called Apollo 11, which we'll all know about, landed safely on the moon. And of course, this was the first moon landing. The amount of expertise, the amount of the greatest brains of America's scientific community, the amount of money that was devoted to the project of being the first to put a man on the moon was immense, immense. I mean, immense amount of brain power. Although, as somebody once said, the amount of computing power they had was minuscule compared to the amount of computing power that's contained in this little product by Mr. Jobs' company. Still, with a spaceship which, by today's standards, and technology which, by today's standards, was extremely crude, they landed on the moon on the 20th of June, and they brought back some soil samples. One small step for a man, one great leap forward for mankind, something roughly like that. But Reb Shlomo Wolbe, the great thinker, the great mashgiach, um, it was always one of my ambitions to hear a shiur from Reb Shlomo Wolbe, the author of Ali Shur and other works. Reb Shlomo Wolbe once, in a shiur which he gave after Yom Kippur, addressed the boys in the yeshiva and said the following thing. The success of the Apollo 11 mission was not that they landed on the moon. I mean, it made very, very good television coverage, and almost every television set, and probably every television set, how about that for a generalization, in the world at that moment was tuned to watch the first uh, pictures being beamed back to Earth of the first man on the moon. But that wasn't the climax. The climax wasn't the moon landing. It wasn't just, oh, you've done it. Oh, now this is Houston Control here. Well done. Goodbye. They didn't just leave them there. Obviously, the success of the mission was putting men on the moon and bringing them safely home again. As much, said Reb Shlomo Wolbe, as much effort, as much science, as much resources went into getting them back as getting them there in the first place. We've been through Elul, we've been through Rosh Hashanah, we've been to the climax, which is Yom Kippur. But just as importantly is how you got back again. And when they splashed down in, was it Pacific? I think it was the Pacific. That was the success when they were picked up, and of course there was footage of that as well. That was the ultimate triumph. Coming back and landing safely, in the normal world, in the real world, if I can call it that, and doing it successfully, that's the success of the whole process that we've just been through. And what if that splashdown was not successful? Because maybe the landing was a bit rough, and maybe because the trajectory was a little bit off. How was your Yom Kippur? What happens? It's what comes next. We know what to do in Yom Kippur. But the real test of Yom Kippur is what comes next. My Rosh Hashiva was Reb Leib Gurovitz, the Kasadik Kodesh Lebrach, the Rosh Hashiva, and then an essay, and this is in page Kuf Samach. He writes the following thing, quoting Rabbi Dessler. I'll read this a little bit to you. Shemati mipam, I heard once, Sha'omar Hagon Hatzadik. I heard from the Gon, the genius, the Tzaddik, and that is Marina Harim Harav Eliyahu Eliezer Dessler. Rabbi Dessler. If a person wants to know, excuse me, Yom Kippur time, if he had a successful Yom Kippur, I think we all want to know that. Then examine yourself. Engage in a bit of introspection. How are you feeling? How are you feeling the day after Yom Kippur? Do you feel anew, as almost like a garment's been put in the washing machine because that's smelling fresh and clean? You can see it's clean. Did you feel that spiritually? Did you feel that? If you feel that, and you're rededicated and charged up to be an Eved Hashem, to get your relationship with Hashem right, then fine. As Yochel writes, then you've succeeded in doing what Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Elul, what it was all about. What if you didn't? I didn't. I was really struggling in Yom Kippur. I was struggling very badly. And I'll tell you why I was struggling badly. But I don't think I was feeling very well physically. Or maybe the fact I wasn't feeling well physically was because of the following story. You see, I give a shiur to men here where I live in Long Island. And I give 5 special shiurim. Sorry, I've still got this cough. Sorry. I gave 5 special shiurim leading up to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Actually, this was before, during Elul, leading up to Rosh Hashanah, and then the guys asked for an extra one going up to Yom Kippur. And so the shiur I was giving Yom Kippur was pointing out what the Rambam famously says. I think we're all familiar with this. But the Rambam says that Hashem can forgive you for anything. And as Mesilas Yesharim says, that's even murder or even adultery. Hashem can forgive you for that. What Hashem cannot forgive you for is something you did to other people. And if you've done something to them and it's bad, then you have to get them to forgive you. Hashem can't forgive. I can't say, Hashem, forgive me for punching somebody in the nose, George in the nose. Hashem's answer is obvious. It wasn't my nose he punched, it was his. Go and ask him for forgiveness. So therefore, he can't forgive you for what you did to other people. That you have to get the other people to forgive you for. you've got to go and apologize. And the Rambam famously says in the first parak of Hilchos Tshuva in Halacha Tes that you should go with three of his friends even and say, I'm really sorry. You've got to show him you're really sorry, or her you're really sorry, and beg their forgiveness. And if the person says no, you've got to come back with another three different friends of his. And then a third time. And if, concludes the Rambam, after three times of begging forgiveness, the person refuses to give that forgiveness, then you've done your job and they become the sinner. The sin passes to them. But what if what you did was so bad that the person can't forgive? Well, it depends. The Rambam goes on to qualify that in the next halacha. He says a Jew should never be cruel and refuse to accept a sincere apology. And if you put it both together, and I checked this with my Rav the Gateshead Rav, and if you put them both together, it comes out that what he's saying is, when is it that if the Jew refuses to forgive three times, that the sin becomes his? And the answer is, if you're refusing to forgive out of cruelty, you want me to forgive you? Burn in hell. That means you could forgive, but you're refusing to forgive. If, however, the thing that you did wrong is unforgivable, the person simply can't forgive it. Think of sexual abuse. Think of the worst things that could happen. Then your inability to forgive them is simply a token of the fact you can't forgive them. Not because you're refusing to forgive them. Not that you could and are choosing not to. You can't because it was so bad. Now, there is a way forward for that as well. And as I've gone off slightly a tangent, I can't resist telling you that more and more than you ever give to somebody by forgiving them, you give to yourself by forgiving them. Even the big stuff. Doesn't mean say you have to like them. Doesn't mean say you want to, become buddies with them. Especially if we're talking about the category of offense that would need maybe a lifetime's therapy to recover from. But you see, if you can't let go of the past becomes the present. The event or events which has so affected you from the past becomes the present. Whatever it was that happened to you that's so traumatic that you're going to need therapy for the rest of your life, that's happening to you now. It's an ongoing process. So more than you ever give to the person by forgiving them, you give to yourself. For the very simple reason, you are letting go of the past. And then that thing that happened, which is effectively happening all the time because you can't let go of it, you suddenly start to let go. So that's critical. And I was saying this over in the Shiur to the men who come to my Shiur. And I also pointed out where it says about that you're not allowed to hate, the Apostle says, you're not allowed to hate your brother in your heart, rather. And the wonderful sefer called Pele Yoetz points out that this mitzvah means that if you have a complaint against somebody, if somebody upset you and hurt you, and you win and you confront them, the way I would suggest you do it is, it seems to me that you did such and such, or you said such and such. Give them the ability to offer you a different narrative, a different explanation, which so often is available. I mean, there's three possibilities. Somebody hurt you very badly, and you confront them with it, and you say, using my formula of words, it seems to me that you did such and such. And they turn around and say, well, actually, that's not true. I didn't. And they give you a different explanation. Or it could be they say, yes, I did. And I have to tell you, I've been struggling for a year, 5 years, 10 years to try and find a way to come and apologize, but I've just not been able to do it. Okay. Or they could turn around a third alternative is, yeah, I did it. I'm glad I did it. I get a chance, I'll do it again. You don't have to forgive that. That guy's not asking you for forgiveness. The Rambam says it's only you offer this whole thing they've been discussing only kicks in if the person is actually sorry, not if they're celebrating what they did and can hardly wait to repeat it. That's a different issue altogether. So knowing that I was about to give this in the Shiur, and knowing that you have to go and tell somebody, I've got a problem with you. I think you did. It strikes me. I had someone like that. There was somebody, it was a matter of embarrassing. I was embarrassed in public by somebody. It was a rabbi. It should not have happened. It was pretty clear that it shouldn't have happened. I couldn't really think of a way out of this, but you've still got to say, it seems to me, the fellow might have just told, if he turns around and says, yes, I did, but I didn't mean to. I just got a diagnosis of cancer. Then you find suddenly you've always got to assume there could be another version of events which will take away your heart. But certainly it was a case like that. And this happened about 4 years ago. And every time it comes to this time of year, or Erev Yom Kippur, when I know what the halakha says, and I'm working on these things about willing to forgive somebody, but it always comes back and haunts me. And even though I've tried to forgive the fellow, it always comes back and haunts me. The memory comes back and haunts me. I'm not letting go of the past. I wasn't able to let go of the past. As a consequence, it was the present. It still hurt. And I'm telling the men in my shiur, and therefore you should go, and you have to go and tell the person. How can I give that shiur when I didn't confront this fellow. I didn't point this out to him that I was embarrassed and you were responsible, and give him the chance to say, yes, I did it, but I'm really sorry about it. No, I didn't do it. Oh, yes, I did it, and I couldn't care less. But at least you've got to confront them. So I confronted him, or rather, I wrote an email. So about 2 days before Yom Kippur, I wrote the email, and the day before Yom Kippur, or the hours before Yom Kippur, a reply arrived, which basically said, yes, I did it, but I think it was justified. And that was extraordinarily problematic. It was that, and I think, that led to my Yom Kippur being pretty awful. My davening on Yom Kippur night, called Nidri. And even though I was given the honor of Marishul, along with the rabbi of the show, to stand at the bima holding the Sifri Torah, as of course we all go around in procession, which is a huge honor, but it wasn't working then. The whole Yom Kippur, what it normally does, you feel it, just as Rabbi Dessa said. Yeah, it's afterwards, but certainly when you're there and you call Nidri, that really touches every Jewish soul. I wasn't doing it. And the next day, I really struggled. I couldn't. It was like swimming through concrete. And then I became aware, at least I was convinced, that the reason is because of this incident. I challenged this fellow, and he had replied, and he basically said, it's not an issue. I'm not worried about it. Um, Not quite, I don't care, but he certainly didn't think he'd done anything wrong. And that's a problem because I now had to adjust my shiur for next year and to spread the word that when I advise, as I do advise people sometimes, as I've just done to you, quoting the Pele Yoetz, so somebody's done something really wrong to you, you have to go and confront them. Then it's essential that to add the caveat, but only if you have got a reasonable assumption that if they did do it, they're going to be sorry about it. If they're not, then it's going to be worse. I'll tell you a really horrible story. Once one of my books is called That's Life. In fact, there's if I move this around, yeah, look there. If you can see there, that's a whole. There's a finger. Well, that's life. There's a whole shelf of those. Just happen to keep them there. So this book started off as an article for Hamadiyya newspaper. The book is based on a statement of the Kotzker Rebbe, which says that a man, a woman, a Jew has to believe in three things. You have to believe in God, you have to believe in the Jewish people, and you have to believe in yourself. So the book's in three subsections. In the book, from the article, I discussed kids going off the derech and kids who from religious backgrounds who abandon the whole thing. And I cited three reasons in the original article. One is they abandon the Jewish community because the Jewish community abandoned them. That is to say that they were rejected for going to a school that their parents wanted them to go to, that they wanted to go to, but they weren't good enough and were rejected, maybe had no school to go to at all. Another reason, I said, is that they come from a very bad family background. There was, unhappiness in the home, or parents who really didn't get on, and there was all sorts of conflict. But that's the one I don't get the most of all the reasons. I don't get that one very well because it's so common. Yet people overcame that. After all, Avram Avinu did a very nice father. And if you think of all the greats of the fathers and mothers of the Jewish people, they almost always came from really awful families, or if not awful families, like Yaakov, he had an awful brother. So people can overcome that, but okay, that's a problem. The other one is being told that you don't have, you ask a question, you're not allowed to ask the question. That's heresy, that's apicorsis, you can't ask such a question. It's usually a very good question, incidentally. What it really means is the teacher, the Rebbe, or the Moreh, if it's a woman, doesn't know the answer, so they shout at the child. So the child's got good questions which aren't answered. Well, guess what? that festered and grew and eventually became uh, the catalyst for rejection of Judaism. This was published in this newspaper, and I got a phone call from a lady who didn't want to give her name. By the way, I'll let you into the rabbi business. When somebody phones up and doesn't want to give their name, it's usually an indication that there's something very serious coming. This woman said, Rabbi, you talked in your article, which you kindly said you liked, um, about reasons for kids going off the derech, and you gave three reasons why children would abandon their religious upbringing. She said, but there's a fourth. I said, oh, you mean sexual molestation? And she went very quiet on the phone, and she said, I'm a survivor. And it turned out she'd been raped by her father. Now, this is a fellow with a strand, like a Hasidic Jew, She herself is a rebbitzin. She's married to a rabbi. He teaches in yeshiva. She gives shiurim to women. They live in Israel, originally from America, and the father had raped her. So she kept phoning for advice, and it was turned into something like an ad hoc therapy session for about a month or 2 months. Eventually, I found it very frustrating she didn't give her name. I mean, I understood, but I said to her once, actually, I find it very difficult that I can't call you by a name. So I'm going to give you a name. I'm going to call you Rivka. So she paused and then burst out laughing because that was her name. And she'd phoned me that particular day to ask my advice. The advice was that it was Sukkot, or about to be Sukkot, just as it is now. And her parents are coming from America to spend time with them and see the grandchildren. And she wanted to confront her father about what he did. What did I think? And I said, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea. She said, why not? I said, look, I'm hardly an expert in this at all, but I suspect, knowing human nature, that he's likely to deny it completely. He'll say that you're suffering from postpartum depression, or you're delusional, or you've gone mad, and that will be to take the knife and twist it in the wound. Not only did it happen to you, but now the fact he's staring you in the face and calling you a liar will be, well, almost as bad as the original thing. I said, but you know what? I have a relative, a Rabbi Dr. Shimon Russell. We're in Gateshead together, and his brother is my mechutin. Our children are married to each other. I said, let me phone him because he's got much more expertise in this area than I have. So I did, and I said, what do you think? He said, you're 100% right. I've dealt with scores of such cases, he said. Scores. And never once did the father admit his guilt, except on one occasion. I think he said actually over 100. And only on one occasion did the father fall on his knees and beg his daughter's forgiveness. So I'd given the right advice to her, but I omitted to include that and incorporate that into my shiur to the men. And I will have to from now on. Yes, you must go and tell somebody that if they've upset you, but I think it has to be that you have to do that with an expectation they will accept it. Because if you expect, and it's 50-50 even, that they might do what that father did to his daughter, maybe it's better not to. But then it's a catch-22 situation, is it not? It's a vicious cycle, a vicious circle. Because how can you go into Yom Kippur having not forgiven somebody, or having not confronted somebody in order to be able to forgive the person? That's really the question. How can you go and do that? So now we come to the Alshich. This is the Alshich here is on, as we said, Parshas. Haazinu, and at the beginning of the Parsha, it says, if I read this, as we're only looking at one pasuk, so you doesn't have to, you have to go very far. Haazinu hashemayim ba'adabera. Haazinu hashemayim ba'adabera. I'm struggling to translate the word Haazinu. We'll just call it listen. Listen. A random English word. You'll see where I'm going in a second. Haazinu hashemayim ba'adabera v'sishma. Sishma, the word shema, we'll call that here. Actually, you know what? As I'm using these two words, if I'm going to be accurate, I should do it the other way about. That is to say, Haazinu really means here. Haazinu shemayim ba'adabera v'sishma, and listen, ha'oretz repeats the words of my mouth. Now, if you've been with me in Shiurim through the year or so, you will know that one of my important rules I keep coming back to is there are no such things as synonyms in Lashon HaKodesh. In the Torah's Hebrew, every word is unique, even though it sounds as though it's the same. Enosh, Ish, Gibor, Odom are four words that all refer to a man, and that would be a legitimate English translation. But there are no synonyms. So there's a difference between an Enosh, an Ish, and a Gibor, and an Odom. They all talk about different aspects of a man. There are no synonyms. So what's the difference between here, Shema, as in Shema Yisrael, and Haazinu, Ozen? Ozen, of course, is ears, as nine. So what's the difference? And why does he use one when he's talking about the heavens? Hear, O heavens, and the Tishma Oretz Imrafi, and let the earth hear my Amira, my words. Another important thing is we've got here again two words which talk about speech. Daber, Haazinu Hashemayim. The heavens should hear when I daber, and let the earth hear me when I speak. Daber and Omer, again, you could translate them equally as when I speak. It says daber is to speak harshly, and Omar is to speak gently. It's almost the difference between the way a father speaks to a child, or a boy, let's say, who's misbehaved, and the way a mother speaks. And there's the imagery that's conjured up by a father speaking daber, that's like harsh, but a mother's gentle. So Amir, Omar, Aleph Mem Resh, is to speak gently, like a mother perhaps. Daber, another three words, the three letters, that's to speak harshly. When Moshe is speaking to heaven, he says, listen, or rather, hear. I think that's how I want to translate that. The heaven should listen, and I'm going to speak harshly. V'sishma oretz imrafi, and let the earth listen to my Omar when I speak gently. Now, everybody, Rashi says there that these words are echoed or copied, perhaps might be, or nearly copied, by the Novi Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu, in the beginning of Yeshayahu, it says, if I can find this, of course, well, he quotes it the other way about. Why am I not finding this? Oh, I think because I got the wrong volume. Oh, there you go. This volume base. It just goes to show that this is not a phony background. What do you call that? There's a name for that. Anyway, you can choose funny backgrounds. So I'm told. It starts off with Chazan Yeshua, the vision, the prophetic vision of Yeshua ben Amos, Isaiah the son of Amos, and it says Shema Shemaim. So he says Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was addressing the heavens, he used the word Haazinu. But the prophet Yeshua says Shema Shemaim, and Bazina Eretz, and the earth, which Moshe says Shema, he uses Haazinu. Then it's there. So what's the difference? And the answer is really quite simple. It just really lies in the translations of these two words. That is to say, Haazinu Hashemayim. Haazinu is when something is far off. Normally, you would use the word Haazinu. In Moshe Rabbeinu's case, Haazinu, sorry, that was wrong. Ignore that last bit. Haazinu, Moshe Rabbeinu is nearer to heaven. Moshe Rabbeinu, when he comes down from Mount Sinai, is like an angel. His face shines. Nobody is as great as Moshe Rabbeinu, etc., etc. He's nearer to heaven. So because he's nearer to heaven, you can say to heaven, Haazinu. And Haazinu means it's when you're speaking to somebody close, so maybe almost like a whisper, right? It's just a gentle speech. Or rather speech when somebody's close by. Shema is Shema Yisrael, right? It's all you speak to the whole Jewish people, right? It's almost like a call. So that's the difference between the two. It indicates Moshe Rabbeinu was closer to heaven than Isaiah was, than Yeshayahu was. So therefore, he says Shema, which is what you would call out to heaven, because heaven's farther away from him. But Moshe Rabbeinu is right there. And then he says, because he's speaking to heaven, but Adaber, and I'm speaking harshly, because there is a rule that a tzaddik geyser, a tzaddik can say things and demand that heaven responds, and can tell angels what to do. Yaakov Avinu, after all, dispatched angels to the confrontation with his brother Esau, go and see what he's doing. He can command. A tzaddik can command. A complete tzaddik, a completely saintly person, because there's nothing holier than a Jewish, than a neshama, a soul. And when the soul gets it right and becomes a tzaddik, then he can tell heaven what to do. So they said, in other words, I'm telling you. I'm telling you to listen. It's a command. But then it says the Sishma, but let the earth hear Imi, my words. And the Alshich says here something very important. You can command angels, but when you're talking to human beings who've got freedom of choice, you can't speak harshly. There can be no daber. It's got to be omer. You've got to appeal to them to get them to listen. To get them to listen. In fact, the Alshich says this at the beginning of the book of Devarim. So if you look back in our sharing, you'll see it there. When, if you remember, Moshe speaks to Jewish people and he mentions all the places, says where they were, Ever Yarden, Bamidbar, all the places, says Rashi, they weren't in all those places. He's recounting chronologically and just hinting the names of the places where the Jewish people rebelled against Hashem. Why didn't he speak it out and say explicitly what he's trying to say and reminding them of all these places? And the answer is, according to the Alshich, he was testing the waters. The actual moshel he uses is like somebody who sniffs a barrel of wine to see whether the wine is sweet and not gone off. Moshe was testing the waters to see if the Jewish people were going to be willing to listen to the criticism and accept the criticism. Then he'll move on, because of course the point is that after that initial testing of the waters, Moshe Rabbeinu is extremely explicit about what they did wrong and when they did it and where they did it. Why wasn't it explicit here? Why is it only a hint? He wants to see if they're going to accept the criticism. That's the point. So this point that I told you before, you have to have a realistic expectation that in telling somebody they've done something to upset you, that they're going to listen. Because they also said if Moshe Rabbeinu had thought that they weren't going to listen, or the indicators were that they weren't listening, he wouldn't have said a thing. So we're taking me back. So we're going back to me now. So on this particular Yom Kippur's over. How did I do? Well, I know I didn't do very well on Yom Kippur because this was troubling me. And I was looking around the show, as I think I may have mentioned in the show I daven in, I'm the oldest person in the show. I'm the official Zadie of the show. And there was nobody really sort of rabbinically older than me or my age to go and say, you got 10 minutes, I just want to talk this over with you. So I thought to myself, I've got to get out of this. So you see my catch-22. I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I confronted the person. The person said, I'm not sorry. I've not forgiven him, and it's upsetting me. What do you do? Then what do you do? Okay. Now, fortunately, I've been learning with my chavrusa, we are learning at the moment, every morning, the classic ethical and moral work, Musar work, the Shiur. And here I have this is Shiur. We're up to chapter 11. I'm also from a men's Shiur, my weekly men's Shiur, we're learning that as well as the Alshich, the Shiur. And there, in fact, this year I already gave a gift to them on Shabbos because I'm late because of Yom Kippur and stuff. Hope you forgive me. Then they already heard this year. But we're up to chapter 11. And chapter 11, in it, he's going through all sorts of midas, all sorts of character traits, which you have to deal with. And he comes to this thing about hating people, being angry with people, hating them, and bearing grudges. But the language here is incredibly interesting. I mean, this is, of course, the classic Ramchal, Moshe Khan Sato, a Kabbalist, a truly holy man. And yet he speaks in very, very down-to-earth terms that every one of us will recognize. And let me read a little bit to you. Gamasina Banakima. Now let's discuss, he says, Jews hating each other, Banakima, and wanting to take revenge when somebody has slighted you, done something terrible to you. It's extraordinarily difficult to, as it were, step away from those character traits. Let me go on. Lev hutol asher livnei odom, because of your heart, the heart of a human being. True translation is and this is also incidentally a lev hutel is actually also a pasuk from Yeshayahu. It's in Mem Daled and pasuk Kof. It means a deceptive heart, or a heart which deceives you. So somebody insults you, and again, I'll just let him read the words, because Asher Libnei Adam, because people have hearts which are easily hurt. Ki Adam margish ma'od be'elbanasav, because a person feels his elbon. Elbon is the Hebrew word for insult. People feel insult very, very much. And in my case, it was a public insult. And in fact, the Gemara says you should rather throw yourself into a fiery furnace than to embarrass somebody in public. So, but Mr. Sherman, I've just finished learning this, says that a public insult or an insult is something which every human being feels deeply. I mean, tsar godel, and you suffer a great deal, tsar godel, a great deal of suffering from insults. But the common law, Matuka Midvash, when a person has been insulted in such a way, nothing could be more natural than to want to, as it were, have revenge, to take revenge. What do the Italians say? The famous mafia saying, vengeance is a dish best served cold. You don't want to, in a fiery moment, no, calculate, plan how I'm going to get this person. And the Ramachal says, and in a sense, incidentally, of course, the Ramachal actually came from Italy, so that was quite a good comparison. But anyway, so basically, he said, but that is human nature. And if somebody does something really nasty to you and something nasty happens to him, then you feel, aha, right, he got his comeuppance. What was more natural? But if a person is able to overcome that natural feeling of wanting revenge and taking revenge on somebody who has hurt you, and the Yavor al Midosav, now they're coming back to those words again, Yavor al Midosav, and to confront your basic nature, or to change, confront and reject your basic nature would be a better way of putting it. Right? Somebody's really insulted you and you're really hurt. Every atom of your being is saying, get revenge for this. And you overcome that. And you overcome it. And you don't take vengeance. When vengeance uh, avails, it makes itself available to you. And you don't bear grudges either. Ella is a call yishkach v'yosem milibo ki ilo lo hoyo, but rather you put out your mind, you forget about it, and you consciously make it as though it never happened. Chozak v'amitzu, that's big. V'hukal rak l'malach yashuras, and you've reached a level just below that of angels. But it is your nature. It is your nature. So I was sitting there in shul, or davening, whether I was standing or sitting, I can't remember, and there was nobody I could discuss this with, but this came into my mind. But if you can, even when somebody has insulted you, I wrote to the fellow and he didn't accept. He accepted it. It was perhaps wrong, but not probably thought justified. And I was in frustration and not knowing what to. And then I thought of these words because it says here, even though it's your nature, if you can be maverick al midosav, if you can ignore your nature, if you can conquer the human condition, then that's why you're below that of an angel. If you can maverick al midosav, and that related to another couple of things that was going around in my mind at the same time. I've got to tell you what Matthias Solomon says here, and really he's quoting, going back to the mafia once again. He's quoting, I think, my Rosh Hashiva Bleb Gurvitz, who was his Rosh Hashiva as well, in Gateshead. And he says an interesting thing. We all know that Hashem offered the Torah to all the nations of the world, and each nation of the world turned around and rejected it only for one mitzvah. But the mitzvah was the one that spoke to them as being their basic nature. So the Romans said, we'll take 612 mitzvahs, but not the one that says don't kill. The Ishmaelim said, we'll take all the mitzvahs, but not the one that says don't steal. And so apparently went through all the nations. That means to say that they just couldn't see themselves doing it, but the Jewish people said, Nasa v'nishma, we'll have it and then we'll hear what's in it. My Rosh Hashiva, our Rosh Hashiva, Bleb Gurevitz said, and what would have been the case if we too reasonably had said, as the non-Jewish nations had said, what's in it? And Hashem would have gone through all the mitzvahs and come to the verse in the Torah which says, you're not allowed to speak Lashon Hara. What would we have said? Rather like the like the Gemara says, some people are engaged in violent crime and some people engage in adultery, some in avodah zarah, but almost everybody in some form, even the gentlest forms of Lashon Hara. So what would we have said? So why didn't we say no, like they did, when it seems that this is against our basic nature? And the answer is because you can go against your basic nature. That was the point. Hashem, if he's offering it to you, is telling you, you can beat this. I wouldn't give you something you can't beat. Oh, but it's against my basic nature. You can beat your basic nature. Because ultimately, this isn't the Jewish basic nature. Even though it is human nature, but you can beat that. Mavri only does have, if you can just defeat your basic nature, that's big. I thought to myself, could I do this? He didn't accept that he'd done anything wrong, but could I do this? This gave me a lot of comfort. And those words, El Benoiv, remember the word we used before, El Benoiv? He says that a person, because I'll read this again, a person feels very much insult that he has. And when it starts our God and feels tremendous pain from that. And that conjured up another image or a memory in my mind. And I don't know why this particular season of Tshuva, one of my favorites for him is called Tamer Devorah. Moshe Cordovero, the great Kabbalist who lived in Sass, and was the teacher of the Alshich, by the way. He taught him Kabbalah. And he wrote a wonderful book called Tamer Devorah, Deborah's Pantry. And the whole thing is going through how, and I think we know this, the role of the Jews meant to be to emulate the behavior of Hashem Yisborach, the reactions and the behavior of Hashem Yisborach. And these are, of course, the famous Yud Gimel Midas. The famous Yud Gimel Midas. In the Torah, it's expressed as Hashem, Karachim, B'chanan, Erech B'ayim, B'ravach, Chesed, B'emes, etc. And there are 13 aspects of God's nature there. But again, it comes up in Micha, but there it uses different words to express the same 13 character traits. And one of them that starts off with Mikael Kamal, who is a God like you. And there, in Tamer Devorah, he says, maybe I'll just read a few words of that to you. He says, the first one is Mikael Kamal, Mora ala Yos HaKadosh Baruch Hu Melech Ne'elov. This teaches that Hashem is an insulted king. He's willing to accept insult which nobody else would even consider, no other king would accept. Don't think Hashem couldn't, when somebody insults them, deal with it, lightning bolt, or suddenly strike them down. He could easily do that, but he doesn't. And the Tamer Devorah goes on to say that he carries on accepting the insult from people like me over and over, year after year, in the hope the person will spontaneously regret it and change his behavior. And then he says this is something you should emulate, because the whole idea is to emulate God. And there's the words of the Mesilas Yesharim, together with the words of Moshe Cordovero on Tamer Devorah. He says you can do this. You can do this. But this is telling you how you do this. By realizing Hashem accepts insult. So if I'm insulted, the great Y.Y. Rubenstein, a legend in his own mind, and somebody insulted me, I came into a room and people didn't stand up for me, ha! The chutzpah! Are you kidding? Hashem Yisborach, the Almighty himself, takes insult after insult, millions of insults a day from people who should know better, and doesn't strike them down, doesn't strike back. Why are you getting so upset? And that came into my mind as well. And as I was struggling with Yom Kippur, and it really was, and the thoughts that Rabbi Guras, my Rosh Hashiva, said, if you're going to exit Yom Kippur and you feel better, but I wasn't feeling better, but this is making it better. It's something I can do, even though this fellow has not accepted he did anything wrong. And I'm going to get angry. No. You don't have to get angry. Maver el midosav. So here is what my Rosh Hashiva said in the beginning. That was the end of that essay I told you about. When Kufnin Ches, he says the following thing. This is astonishing. He says, there is a way, the Gemara in Yuma says, there is a way to achieve complete forgiveness, and that is complete forgiveness, olazakas lekaperes avonis, and to get rid of all the things you've done wrong, apilo below tshuva, even without doing tshuva. And how does that work? And he says, Kol hamaver al midosav mavirin lo al kol peshav. Somebody who's maver al midosav, then it's as though if you go against your nature, it's not everything you've done is wiped clean. And why? Because there's no greater indicator that you are worthwhile, that you're going to have a successful year, that you're changing yourself, your trajectory is going up, like Apollo 11, than the fact you're willing to change who you are. And those three Sforim, my Rosh Hashiva, Matasiel's commentary on Mesilas Yesharim and Mesilas Yesharim, and the Moshe Cordovero all came together, and that spoke to me. So what happens when it comes to Yom Kippur? And maybe you didn't forgive the people you should have forgiven, and God can't He can forgive you for anything you did wrong to Him, but not for other people. Well, if you've come down, if you've splashed down, and it's wasn't such a good landing, well, you're still bobbing up and down there. We still get time. We're coming to Sukkot. There's still a way to work in this. I would suggest, sounds extremely lacking in humility, but go over what we just said. Rewind the tape here, and go back. And think of those words. You can do it. The Ramchal in Mesilas Yesharim. It's doable, or you wouldn't be offered the Torah in the first place, even though it hurts you terribly much. It's because you're Mavir al Midos, you must be able to be Mavir to change your nature, or you wouldn't have been asked to keep all the Torah, which challenges your basic nature in the first place. And if you do that, then the slate's wiped clean because you're showing the sort of person who can do such a thing. How do you do it? Just remember that Hashem's willing to do it. And He's the King of Kings. And He's willing to take insults. You can take them as well. And you can move on. You can, as the Ramchal says, just make it as though it never actually happened. Let go of the past. And when you let go of the past, then you're able to move forward. I wish you all a fabulous Sukkot. And I shall look forward to many more Alshich in the year to come.